The people being targeted. Who are the people being targeted by this campaign? Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, Nigerians, Somalis, Congolese, and so forth. These aren't random foreigners. Think about who they are. These are the children and the grandchildren of the Liberation Alliance. The ANC's entire arms struggle was conducted from exile in Zambia, in Tanzania, in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, right? The frontline states sacrificed enormously in order to house and feed and train and protect South African liberation fighters. When the apartheid government of South Africa bombed Mozambique, when they destabilized Zimbabwe, when the apartheid regime of South Africa ran groups into Mozambique, when they ran UNITA into Angola, okay, these were acts of war committed against those countries, any of those countries that chose to stand with the South African people against apartheid, and they stood anyway. Those countries stood anyway. They stood shoulder to shoulder with you anyway. And now South Africa is turning away Zimbabwean pregnant women at their clinics. Now South Africa is deporting Mozambicans. Now South African politicians are calling Nigerians criminals. Now the Somali owner of some shop who's been feeding that community for 20 years, who people have been going to his shop for 20 years, is being attacked because he's supposedly a foreigner who's taking all of our jobs. Now, every one of these ruptures, every one of these events is a diplomatic wound to South Africa. Every one of those viral videos that you see of Africans being mistreated in South Africa spreads across the continent, and it reinforces a very particular and a very ugly narrative, which is that South Africa is not for us. South Africa is xenophobic. South Africa cannot be a continental leader because it treats other Africans like enemies. And that narrative serves a very specific purpose. South Africa's ability to lead the continent, to be an anchor for Southern and Eastern Africa, a sphere of influence, a sphere of influence for that region, to be the voice of the AU that countries would actually listen to be an institutional anchor for a genuinely African pole in the multipolar world. That ability depends entirely on South Africa being seen as African, not just geographically African, but politically African, not committed to Western appeasement, not committed to Western placation, not beholden to colonizer dollars, you understand me? Committed to African solidarity. They have to be seen as a trustworthy continental partner. So the Xenophobia campaign is dismantling that credibility in real time, piece by piece. And that's the objective of it. Like I said, what's happening in South Africa is the same thing that's happening in America. And you should take note of that. It's not just similar, it's the same. It's exactly the same, and for largely the same reasons. In America, you have a white working class, right, that has been economically devastated. That's true. They've been economically devastated. Manufacturing jobs were exported. Wages have been stagnant for 40 years, for most of my life. You had the opioid crisis that was almost entirely in white communities, so-called. Those opioids were put there by pharmaceutical corporations, with those executives walked away with billions of dollars on the backs of the deaths of those people. Communities hollowed out. Their so-called white communities are being hollowed out. Their futures are being foreclosed. And that's going to do nothing but continue. That's going to do nothing but continue and accelerate. And the political machinery that serves the people who are responsible for all of that, who serve the people who are responsible for all that, which is the actual capital class, the Carlyle groups, the Blackstones, the hedge funds, the private equity firms that strip those communities, that same political machinery, economic and political machinery, has directed the people's rage now at Mexicans, at so-called black people, at immigrants, migrants, not at the people at the top, not at the people who are actually making the decisions that are ruining your life. No, MAGA is not a working class revolution. It's a working class rage that has been captured and redirected. The MAGA people, the people who are marching in favor of Trump, they are genuinely angry about genuinely real economic devastation that they have suffered. And MAGA exists specifically and exclusively to redirect their anger at the wrong people. Because the people who are actually responsible for their devastation, for the economic devastation of their lives, they have a machine. The same machine that I just talked about in South Africa. It's the same thing. And that machine produces the messaging. That machine amplifies that messaging through the media that they own. That machine launders that same message and that narrative through the politicians that they fund, and it aims all of that at immigrants and at minorities and at foreigners. Keep the poor fighting the poor. Keep your victims fighting each other. You understand? In South Africa, black working class people have every right to be furious. They have every right. They're furious because 30 years after so-called liberation, the land still hasn't been distributed. You understand? The mines are still not theirs. The banks are still not theirs. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange is still not theirs. They live in Soweto in conditions that would never be acceptable in any Western country, while just 20 minutes down the road in Sandton, you've got a place that looks like Manhattan. You understand? No, their anger is legitimate. Their grievances are absolutely real, just as many of the grievances in America are real. And someone is very carefully making sure that that anger doesn't get aimed at Manhattan or at Sandton or at any rich enclave. Making sure that it gets aimed at the Somali shop owner in Soweto. Making sure that it gets aimed at some Zimbabwean nurse. You understand? Making sure that it gets aimed at some Nigerian trader. Keeping the poor, fighting the poor. While the people who own the structure, who design the structure, who maintain the structure, who profit from the structure, they just watch from behind their walls, starting the fire that they want to prevent the fire from ever getting started that they don't want.